Admiral Kyle Harrison sat in the grand chamber of Unity Prime and watched the alien council members dismiss yet another human proposal without real consideration. The chamber stretched high above them, with walls that gleamed like polished metal, and holographic displays that showed voting results in real time. 300 years had passed since humanity joined the Galactic Council, and Kyle had spent the last 20 of those years representing human interests. Today felt different, though. Today felt like an ending ambassador. Lisa Monroe stood at the central podium and presented data that nobody wanted to hear. Human colonies in the outer sectors had been attacked 17 times in the past year by organized pirate groups, and the death toll had reached thousands. The council needed to authorize stronger patrols and better enforcement in those regions. Counselor Vexton of the Archelians leaned forward in his floating seat, and his 6 eyes blinked slowly in what Kyle had learned was a dismissive gesture. These losses are acceptable given the vast nature of galactic space, Vexton said in his mechanical translator voice. Perhaps humanity should simply adapt better to the realities of frontier living. Lisa's jaw tightened, but she continued with professional calm. With respect, Counselor, these attacks are preventable, she said. We have identified the pirate bases and their supply chains, but we need council authorization to act. The vote came quickly. 47 species voted against the human proposal, and only 12 voted in favor, with 3 abstaining. Kyle was not surprised, but the sting of rejection never really faded. Lisa returned to the human delegation area and sat beside Kyle. Her hand shook slightly as she organized her datapad. 3 centuries of this, she whispered. 3 centuries of being treated like we don't matter. Kyle nodded and pulled up his own presentation. The council moved to the next agenda item, but Kyle stood and requested special time to address the full assembly. Vested sighed, but granted the request. Kyle walked to the podium and activated the holographic display. Behind him, charts and graphs filled the air, showing 300 years of human service to the Galactic Council. Humans provided 60% of all peacekeeping forces, despite making up only 12% of council membership. Human medical teams responded to 90% of humanitarian disasters across council space. Human engineers had built or repaired critical infrastructure on over 200 council worlds. Human negotiators had prevented or ended 43 wars between other species. Human trade networks connected species that refused to deal with each other directly. Economic value of human contributions exceeded what humanity received in return by a factor of 8 to 1. We have served loyally and without complaint, Kyle said. We have bled for the council and died protecting species that barely acknowledge our existence. The chamber remained quiet, but Kyle could see the disinterest in most faces. They had heard human complaints before, and they expected this to be another empty protest. Today we face a situation that requires your attention, Kyle continued. The Threxian-Keltorian conflict has reached a critical point, and both sides have requested council intervention. Councillor Zermach of the Threxian Commonwealth rose from his seat. His species looked like massive reptiles with blue-gray scales and ridged heads. The council has already decided, Zermach announced. Human forces will deploy to create buffer zones between our territory and Keltorian space while council mediators work toward peace. Kyle felt something cold settle in his chest. The council has decided this without consulting humanity, he said quietly, without asking if we agreed to send our people into another war. Vex then made a dismissive gesture with one of his 4 arms. Humanity exists to serve the greater galactic good as determined by the more experienced species of this council, he said. Your military forces are the most suitable for this task, and you will deploy them as directed. The chamber filled with murmurs of agreement from other species. Lisa stood beside Kyle now, and her face had gone pale. 300 years of service, and this was how the council saw humanity, as servants to be ordered around, as tools to be used and discarded. Kyle took a slow breath and felt a strange calm wash over him. He had been angry so many times before, but now he just felt tired of fighting for respect that would never come, tired of watching humans die for species that considered them inferior, tired of pretending this relationship was anything other than exploitation. Then I have an announcement to make, Kyle said into the sudden silence, effective immediately. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted questions and protests, but Kyle spoke over them. All human military forces will return to human space within 30 days. He continued, all human aid programs, medical missions, and peacekeeping operations will cease. All human diplomatic facilities in Council space will close, and all human personnel will be recalled. We will maintain peaceful relations with individual species who wish to trade or cooperate with us, but we will no longer participate in Council affairs or accept Council authority over human actions. Vexton's translator voice cut through the chaos with what sounded like amusement. This is an empty threat, he said. Humanity needs the Council more than the Council needs humanity. You will return within weeks when you realize your mistake. Kyle gathered his documents and looked around the chamber one last time. We have given you 3 centuries of loyal service, he said. We have asked only for basic respect and fair treatment in return. Since you cannot provide even that, we have nothing more to discuss. Lisa activated her comm unit and sent the withdrawal order to every human facility in Council space. The message was simple and clear. Come home, Kyle, and Lisa walked toward the exit, while alien delegates called after them with mockery and disbelief. Some laughed openly at the idea that humans would actually leave, others dismissed it as a negotiating tactic that would fail. None of them believed humanity would really abandon the Council. None of them understood that something had broken today that could not be easily repaired. As the doors closed behind them, Kyle heard Zermach's voice echoing through the chamber. Let them go, the Threxian said. They will learn their place soon enough. Lisa looked at Kyle with tears in her eyes. Did we just make a terrible mistake? She asked. Kyle thought about all the humans who had died protecting ungrateful aliens, thought about the colonies left undefended, and the contempt in Vexton's eyes. No, he said. We should have done this a long time ago. Behind them, the Council continued its session as if nothing important had happened. They would learn soon enough how wrong they were. Captain Dennis Wright stood on the bridge of the Houston and stared at the orders that had just come through from Earth Command. Return home, abandon patrol routes, leave Council space. He had been protecting the Viridian Trade Corridor for 6 years and knew every asteroid field and station along the route now. He was supposed to just leave it all behind. Captain, we're receiving multiple distress calls, his communications officer reported. The Merchants Guild is requesting an emergency meeting. Dennis nodded and authorized the meeting. Within an hour, his conference room filled with holographic projections of alien traders from a dozen different species. A Valarian merchant named Cress spoke first, and her tentacles writhed with anxiety. Captain Wright, is it true that all human forces are leaving? She asked. The pirate clans are already gathering at the edge of the sector. They know you won't be here to stop them. Dennis felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but orders were orders. I'm sorry, he said. My government has recalled all military assets to human space. The Council will need to provide security for these routes now. A Horthian trader made a sound like grinding rocks, which Dennis recognized as bitter laughter. The Council, the trader said. The Council has never cared about protecting our trade routes. You humans were the only ones who actually patrolled and kept us safe. Cress leaned closer to her projector. Captain, in the 6 years you've been here, pirate attacks dropped by 87%. She said, in the 2 months since rumors of human withdrawal started, attacks have already tripled. If you leave, Hundreds of merchants will die, and thousands more will lose their livelihoods. Dennis wanted to help, but he had his orders, and after 3 centuries of being used by the Council, humanity was done. "I wish things were different," he said. "But the Council made their choice when they treated us as servants instead of partners." The meeting ended with pleas and protests, but Dennis remained firm. The Houston and her sister ships began the journey back to human space and left the corridor undefended. 2 weeks later, Dennis received intelligence reports that showed his fears coming true. Attacks in the Viridian corridor had increased by 400%. 3 merchant convoys had been completely destroyed with no survivors. Meanwhile, on Unity Prime, Councillor Vex then sat in his private office and reviewed reports from across Council space. The numbers troubled him more than he wanted to admit. The Keltorian-Threxian War had intensified dramatically without human peacekeepers to maintain buffer zones. Border conflicts were erupting between species that had been kept apart by human patrols. Economic indicators showed declining trade in 73 sectors previously secured by human forces. Medical response times to disasters had increased by 600% without human crisis teams. Vex then told himself these were temporary problems that would resolve once proper Council forces took over. But deep down he knew the truth. The Council had no forces that could match human effectiveness. No other species was willing to send their people into danger zones the way humans did. No other species had the organizational ability or dedication to serve the common good above their own interests. Message came through from the Council Security Division. They had attempted to organize patrols for the Viridian corridor, but 3 different species had refused to commit ships. Each claimed their forces were needed to protect their own territory without human coordination. The Council could not even agree on basic security operations. Governor Chen Park oversaw the evacuation of human personnel from the Nexus research station, where humans and aliens had worked together for 50 years on advanced physics projects. The alien scientists gathered in the common area to say goodbye, and many seemed confused about why the humans were leaving. A young Archelian researcher named Kel approached Chen with datapads in all 4 hands. "Governor, who will manage the quantum resonance experiments?" Kel asked. "The human team handles all the safety protocols and system integration. We don't know how to maintain the equipment without them." Chun felt a pang of guilt, but kept his expression neutral. "I'm sure the Council will send qualified replacements," he said. Kel's eyes dimmed, which Shen recognized as a sign of distress. "Governor, we tried to run yesterday's experiment without the human safety team," Kel said quietly. "We nearly caused a cascade failure that could have destroyed the entire station. We didn't realize how much we depended on human expertise until you announced you were leaving." Similar scenes played out across Council space research stations that humans helped manage. Began experiencing critical failures. Infrastructure projects stalled when human engineers withdrew. Administrative systems collapsed without human organizational skills. The problem was not that aliens were incompetent. The problem was that humans had quietly become essential to countless operations. And nobody noticed until they were gone. Merchant Rebecca Cole closed her trading company's last office in Council space and watched as her alien employees packed up decades of work. Her company had served as a neutral intermediary between the Threxians and Keltorians, who refused to trade directly with each other due to ancient cultural conflicts. Without human middlemen, that trade network was collapsing. A Keltorian warehouse manager approached Rebecca with what looked like sadness in his large eyes. "Miss Cole, what will happen to us?" he asked. "My warehouse handles goods from Threxian manufacturers, but my people won't buy directly from Threxians. Your company was the bridge between us." Rebecca had heard the same question from dozens of employees. "I don't have an answer," she said honestly. "The Council needs to figure out how to bridge these gaps themselves. Humans can't keep solving everyone's problems while being treated with contempt." The warehouse manager made a gesture of understanding, but Rebecca could see the fear in his eyes. Thousands of businesses across council space depended on human neutrality and reliability. Without humans to facilitate trade between hostile species, economic networks were fragmenting. 3 months after human withdrawal, a humanitarian crisis erupted on a non-council world called Paraxis. A massive earthquake devastated the main continent and killed tens of thousands. For decades, human relief organizations had been first responders to such disasters, with ships, supplies, and trained personnel arriving within hours. This time, nobody came. Council held emergency sessions to organize a relief effort, but internal disagreements paralyzed action. The Threxians insisted their species should lead the mission, but the Keltorians refused to participate under Threxian command. The Archelians wanted to debate proper procedures before committing resources. 3 other species argued about who would pay for the operation by the time the council finally agreed on a basic plan. 2 weeks had passed when relief ships finally arrived at Paraxis. They found mass graves and refugees dying from preventable diseases. The death toll had reached over 100,000. Most could have been saved with prompt action. Vex then read the reports and felt something he rarely experienced: shame. The disaster on Paraxis was not a coincidence or bad luck. It was a direct result of human absence. Humans did not respond because the council had driven them away. The council could not fill the gap because no other species had humanity's combination of speed, organization, and selfless dedication. Vexen sat alone in his office and finally admitted what he had refused to acknowledge: the Galactic Council needed humanity far more than humanity needed the Council. But his pride, and the pride of the entire Council, prevented them from admitting their mistake. Instead, they told themselves the crisis would pass. They told themselves other species would step up. They told themselves humanity would come back. They were wrong on all counts. Commander Brandon Walsh monitored the sensor arrays at Border Station 12 and watched the steady stream of refugee ships fleeing from Council space toward human territory. 6 months had passed since humanity withdrew from the Galactic Council, and the situation in Council space had gone from bad to catastrophic. Hundreds of ships appeared on his screens every day, and each one carried desperate aliens seeking safety. Brandon's orders were clear: humanity would accept refugees and provide humanitarian aid, but would not intervene militarily in Council affairs. He opened the channel to an incoming Valarian transport that was broadcasting distress signals. "This is Commander Walsh of the Human Federation," he said. "Please state your situation." The response came through with heavy static and background noise. "Commander, this is transport vessel Bright Wing carrying 2,000 civilians from the Kelver system." A female Valarian voice said, "Our world has descended into civil war, and we are seeking asylum in human space." Brannon authorized the ship to proceed to processing stations where human officials would evaluate asylum requests. This was the 53rd refugee ship he had cleared in just the past week. The Kelver system had been stable for generations, with human peacekeepers maintaining order between 3 ethnic groups that had historical tensions. Within months of human withdrawal, old hatreds reignited into violence. Now millions were fleeing, and the death toll climbed into the hundreds of thousands. Far from the border, the Keltorian-Threxian war had spiraled completely out of control. Both species had assumed they could achieve quick victory without human interference. Instead, the conflict had devolved into total war, with neither side able to gain advantage. Counselor Zermach stood in his command center on the Threxian homeworld and watched tactical displays show another major defeat. His forces had lost 3 fleets in the past month, and Keltorian ships now threatened Threxian colonies. "Where are our reinforcements?" Zermach demanded. His tactical officer looked exhausted. "Commander, we don't have reinforcements," the officer said. "Our logistics networks have collapsed without human coordination." Supply ships cannot reach the front lines because we cannot. Protect the supply routes. Zemek felt rage building inside him for decades. Human military advisors had helped the Threxian Commonwealth maintain and organize their forces. Human logistics experts had managed supply chains that kept. Threxian fleet's operational human tactical consultants had provided strategic planning that made Threxian military operations effective. Zorak had always assumed these humans were just assistants who made minor improvements now. He understood they had been essential without human expertise. The Threxian military was collapsing despite having superior numbers and technology on Earth. Dr. Amy Peterson sat in her laboratory and watched news feeds from across Council space as a xenobiologist who had worked with alien species for 20 years. She felt deep sadness at what was happening. Multiple species-specific plagues were spreading through Council space and death tolls were climbing for centuries. Human medical corps had provided rapid response to disease outbreaks with protocols. For treating multiple alien species, human doctors understood cross-species contamination better than anyone because Earth's own diversity had taught them to think broadly. Each alien species had excellent doctors for treating their own kind, but few understood how to handle diseases that jumped between species. The Council was learning this lesson the hard way. A plague that started among the Horthians had spread to 6 other species because nobody implemented proper quarantine protocols. Fast enough, another disease outbreak on a mixed species station killed thousands because medical teams from different species could not coordinate their response. Amy read reports of preventable deaths and felt helpless. She wanted to help, but Earth's government had been clear: humanity would not send aid unless formally requested by the Council, and the Council was too proud to ask. Meanwhile, Krelzen huddled with his family in the cargo hold of a refugee transport heading toward human space. He was a Valerian merchant who had lived his entire life on Kelvar Prime, where 3 ethnic groups coexisted under human peacekeeping supervision when the humans left. Politicians from all 3 groups began stoking old fears and resentments within weeks. Protests turned into riots, riots turned into armed conflict turned into ethnic cleansing. Krelzen had watched neighbors who had lived peacefully together for generations suddenly turn on each other with shocking violences. Family had barely escaped when death squads began moving through their district. Now they were among millions fleeing toward human territory because everyone knew that humans would help even when the Council would not. Will the humans really accept us? His daughter asked. Krelzen held her close. Yes, he said with confidence he did not entirely feel. Humans have always helped those in need, even when it cost them greatly. That is why the Council should never have driven them away. On Unity Prime, the Galactic Council held emergency session after emergency session, but accomplished nothing. Counselor Vexton tried to organize a unified response to the multiple crises, but decades of dismissing human input meant the Council had no contingency plans for operating without human support. Each species prioritized protecting their own territory and interests. The Arkelians withdrew their forces from joint operations to guard their home systems. The Valerians refused to commit ships to patrols that might help Threxian interests. The Horthians demanded payment before providing any assistance. Every decision required lengthy debate, and every debate ended with species blaming each other for the growing disasters. Vexed the Council. He had served for over a century, tear itself apart, without human diplomats to facilitate negotiations between hostile species. Old grudges resurfaced, without human peacekeepers to maintain order. Border conflicts erupted constantly, without human administrators to coordinate complex operations. Every joint project collapsed into chaos. The irony was devastating. The Council had treated humanity as inferior servants who existed only to support their betters. In reality, humans had been the glue holding galactic civilization together. Their willingness to serve without demanding recognition had made them easy to overlook. Their efficiency had made their contributions seem effortless. Their diplomatic neutrality had made them perfect mediators. Their genuine compassion had made them willing to help even ungrateful species. All these qualities that made humans invaluable had also made them easy to take for granted. Criminal organizations and pirate syndicates expanded their operations freely across Council space. They knew no coordinated response would come because the Council could not organize effective law enforcement without human participation. Entire sectors fell under pirate control. Slave trade that had been suppressed for centuries by human anti-slavery patrols flourished again. Smuggling networks moved weapons and contraband without interference. The galactic order that had been maintained for thousands of years was disintegrating. 3 Council species formally submitted requests for human assistance through back channels. They could not make public requests because the Council as a body refused to officially acknowledge their mistake. But desperation was growing, and some species were willing to swallow their pride, even if the Council leadership was not vexed, then read these private requests and felt his heart sink. Galactic Council was dying, not from external invasion or natural disaster. It was dying from arrogance and stupidity. It was dying because its members had been too proud to treat humanity with basic respect. Now millions were paying the price for the Council's failure. Vex knew what needed to happen. The Council needed to formally request humanity's return and offer the humans genuine partnership instead of servitude, but convincing the other Council members to humble themselves would require a miracle or a disaster so complete that even the most arrogant Council members could no longer deny reality. Unfortunately, Vexton suspected that disaster was coming soon. President Nathan Cole stood before the Human Federation Congress and presented the most difficult decision of his administration. The person before the Human Federation Congress and presented the most difficult decision of his administration. The chamber fell silent as he activated holographic displays showing the crisis in Council space. Members of Congress. 1 year has passed since we withdrew from the Galactic Council. Nathan began. The situation in Council space has deteriorated beyond anyone's worst predictions. The display showed devastating statistics the Kaltorian-Threxian War had claimed. Over 3 billion lives, 17 smaller conflicts had erupted across former peacekeeping zones with death tolls in the hundreds of millions. Disease outbreaks had killed another billion. Due to inadequate medical response, the galactic economy had contracted by 40%. Pirate attacks had increased by 800%. Over 50 million refugees had fled to human space, seeking asylum. Senator Patricia Hughes from the Mars delegation stood to speak. Mr. President, we cannot stand by and watch this suffering continue, she said. We have the resources and ability to help. Our withdrawal has made its point, and now we need to show humanity's better nature. Senator Greg Martinez from the Europa colonies countered immediately. With respect to Senator Hughes, the Council has not acknowledged their mistakes or requested our help formally, he said. If we return without demanding proper treatment, we will be right back where we started, being exploited and disrespected. The debate raged for hours with Congress divided between those who wanted immediate intervention and those who insisted that Council must humble itself first. Nathan listened to both sides and understood the moral complexity. Billions were suffering, but rewarding the Council's bad behavior would doom humanity to centuries more exploitation. Ambassador Lisa Monroe sat in her office at the State Department and reviewed private communications from individual Council members. They all said essentially the same thing. Please help us. We were wrong. We need you. But none of these messages came from the Council officially. Council as an institution remained paralyzed by pride and bureaucratic inertia. Lisa drafted responses to each message with the same answer humanity would provide humanitarian aid and accept refugees, but but military intervention or full cooperation required formal council acknowledgement of past mistakes and guaranteed equal treatment going forward. Some species accepted these terms and began limited cooperation with human aid organizations. Others rejected them as too demanding. Meanwhile, Councillor Vex then worked tirelessly to convince his fellow council members to take official action. He met with faction leaders and presented irrefutable evidence of the crisis. "Look at what we have lost," Vex then said to a gathering of senior council members. "Galactic civilization is collapsing and millions die every day, all because we were too arrogant to treat humanity with basic respect." A Horthian councillor named Grath responded with bitter anger. "You want us to grovel before these young upstarts?" Grath said, "The council has maintained order for 10,000 years. We do not beg for help from species that should be grateful we allowed them to join us." Vex then felt his patience finally break. The council maintained order because humanity did most of the actual work. He shouted, "We sat in comfortable chambers and made decisions while humans bled and died implementing those decisions. We treated them as servants and they tolerated it because of their ridiculous dedication to helping others. Now they are gone, and we are learning what the galaxy looks like without their service." The chamber fell silent. Speaking such truths aloud violated decades of council pretense, but Vextham was past caring about political niceties. "If we do not formally request humanity's return and offer them genuine partnership, the Galactic Council will cease to exist within a year." Vexton said, "That is not an exaggeration. That is mathematical certainty based on current trajectories." The silence stretched until finally a Valarian elder named Cress spoke. She was ancient, even by Valarian standards, and had served on the council for over 2 centuries. "Councillor Vexton is correct," Cress said quietly. "I have lived long enough to recognize when an institution is dying. We are dying because we forgot that leadership requires service, not just authority. Humanity understood this, but we did not. Now we must humble ourselves or perish." Her words carried weight that Vexton's anger could not slowly. Reluctantly, other council members began acknowledging reality. The crisis point came when the Threxian Commonwealth faced imminent extinction. Their fleets had been shattered and Keltorian forces were preparing final assaults on Threxian colony. World's Councillor Zermok made a desperate personal plea directly to the Human Federation. He bypassed the council entirely and contacted President Cole through diplomatic channels. "President Cole, my species faces annihilation," Zermok said. "I know we do not deserve your help after how we treated humanity. I personally dismissed your people as servants who existed to follow orders. I was wrong and my arrogance has cost billions of lives. I am not asking the council's behalf because the council is too proud to ask. I am asking as one leader to another. Please help us." Nathan Cole listened to Zermok's plea and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. This was the moment that it would define humanity's role in the galaxy for centuries to come. "Councillor Zermok, I appreciate your honesty," Nathan said, "and I am deeply moved by the suffering of your people. But I cannot commit human forces to another species. War without proper authority and guarantees. I will provide humanitarian aid immediately. Human medical ships will help Threxian refugees and wounded, but military intervention requires formal council request and guaranteed equal treatment for humanity going forward." Zermok understood and thanked Nathan with genuine humility. The conversation was leaked to council media within hours, and the political impact was immediate. Proud Zermok could admit his mistakes and ask for help. What excuse did the rest of the council have? Captain Jennifer Brooks commanded the medical ship Hopes, light that operated just inside human space near the border. Her ship and dozens like it provided care for the endless stream of refugees. The facilities were overwhelmed, but human organizations worked with remarkable efficiency to provide food, shelter, And medical care. Jennifer walked through refugee camps that stretched for kilometers and listened to the stories of Orthian family whose world had descended into civil war without human peacekeepers, a Valarian merchant who lost everything. When trade networks collapsed, a young Arkelian whose parents died in a plague that proper quarantine could have prevented. Every refugee had a similar story. The council had failed them. Humanity was helping them. Why do you help us after the council treated you so badly? A Valarian elder asked Jennifer. Jennifer thought about the question carefully. Because helping others is the right thing to do. She said simply, we did not serve the council for recognition or gratitude. We served because we believed in creating a better galaxy for everyone. That has not changed, even though our relationship with the council has. The elder made a gesture of deep respect. The council never deserved you. He said back on Unity Prime. Vexton finally convinced enough council members to take action. The vote was close, but the resolution passed. The Galactic Council would send an official delegation to Earth to request humanity's return. The delegation would acknowledge past mistakes and negotiate terms for human participation going forward. Vexton would lead the delegation personally, as he prepared for the journey to Earth. Vexton reflected on his long career. He had served the council with pride and dedication for over a century. He had believed in the council's mission and righteousness now. He understood that the council had been living a comfortable lie. They had taken credit for galactic stability that humanity actually created. They had enjoyed authority without bearing responsibility. They had treated their most valuable members as disposable servants. The journey to Earth would be humbling, but Vexton was ready to humble himself if it meant saving what remained of galactic civilization. The question was whether humanity would accept the council's plea, or whether humanity had decided that the galaxy was better off without the council entirely. The council delegation arrived at Earth 80 months after humanity's withdrawal, and Councillor Vexton felt genuine nervousness for the first time in decades. Their ship landed at the human capital city of Geneva, and Vexton emerged with 12 other senior council members. President Nathan Cole waited at the landing platform with Ambassador Lisa Monroe and a full honor guard. The greeting was formal, but not hostile. Nathan shook hands with each delegation member in the human custom and welcomed them to Earth. Councillor Vexton, your delegation is welcome here, Nathan said. We have prepared meeting facilities where we can discuss the future. Vexton appreciated the courtesy, but knew the real test would come in negotiations. They gathered in a conference room that overlooked the Swiss Alps, and Nathan began the discussion. Before we start, I want to be clear about humanity's position, Nathan said. We withdrew from the council because we were treated as servants rather than partners. We will not return to that relationship under any circumstances. If you are here to ask us to resume our old role, this meeting will be very short. Vexton took a deep breath and spoke words he had rehearsed many times. President Cole, the Galactic Council acknowledges that we treated humanity with disrespect and ingratitude. Vexton said, we took your contributions for granted and dismissed your legitimate concerns. We assumed you would always be available to serve our interests without reciprocation. We were profoundly wrong, and the consequences of our arrogance have been catastrophic. The other council members shifted uncomfortably, but none contradicted. Vextanthus was progress. We are here to request humanity's return to the council. Vexton continued, but we understand that return must be on terms that guarantee your equal standing and fair treatment. Lisa Monroe activated holographic displays showing humanity's proposed terms. These are our conditions for rejoining the council. Lisa said, full voting rights equal to founding. Council members with no restrictions or waiting periods. Guaranteed representation on all major committees and decision-making bodies. Formal protection for human colonies and interests backed by council resources. Economic agreements that value human contributions fairly based on actual market rates. and most importantly, a constitutional amendment to the Council Charter, ensuring no member species can be exploited or treated as subordinate. She paused and looked directly at Vexton. These terms are not negotiable, Lisa said. If the Council cannot accept them, humanity will continue to operate independently. Vexton reviewed the terms carefully. They were exactly what humanity deserved and should have had from the beginning. But some Council members would resist giving up their privileged positions. A Horthian delegate named Krell spoke up with obvious anger. These terms would fundamentally change the Council's power structure. Krell protested. Species that have led the Council for millennia would lose their special status. Nathan leaned forward and his voice was calm but firm. Councilor Krell, your special status was built on exploiting humanity's labor, Nathan said. You enjoyed authority without responsibility because we bore the burden of actually maintaining galactic order. If you want humanity's help, you will accept genuine partnership. If you prefer to maintain your privileges, you can continue managing the crisis without us. The Horthian delegate started to argue, but Vexton cut him off. President Cole is right, Vexton said. The Council's old power structure was unjust and unsustainable. If reforming that structure is the price of humanity's return, then we must pay it. Over the next week, negotiations continued as Council delegates consulted with their governments. Some species accepted human terms immediately. Others resisted until Vexton presented detailed projections showing the Council's complete collapse within months if humanity did not return eventually. Even the most resistant members acknowledged they had no choice. The Council formally accepted all human conditions. Admiral Kyle Harrison received authorization to deploy human forces and felt a mixture of satisfaction and responsibility. The galaxy was burning, and only humanity could help restore order. But this time humanity would act as equals, not servants. His fleet moved systematically through crisis zones with clear objectives and proper support. The first priority was the Keltorian-Threxian War that had claimed billions of lives. Kyle's forces established buffer zones between the warring species and enforced strict ceasefires. Both the Keltorians and Threxians initially resisted, but human military superiority quickly convinced them to cooperate. Councilor Zermach met with Kyle aboard the flagship Dallas and expressed genuine gratitude. Admiral Harrison, my species owes you a debt we can never fully repay, Zermach said. Without your intervention, the Threxian Commonwealth would have been destroyed. Kyle accepted the thanks but remained professional. Counselor, we are not doing this out of charity. Kyle said, we are doing this because we are now equal partners in galactic governance. Partnership means mutual responsibility. The change in relationship was subtle but profound. Human peacekeepers were no longer treated as expendable security guards. They were respected as professional military forces protecting shared interests. Human diplomats were no longer dismissed as naive idealists. They were valued as skilled negotiators with the trust of multiple species. Human engineers and administrators were no longer taken for granted. They were recognized as essential to maintaining complex galactic systems. Captain Dennis Wright returned to the Viridian Trade Corridor that he had been forced to abandon. The sector had suffered terribly during human absence, with pirate attacks killing thousands and destroying trade networks. But the difference in his reception was immediate. The Merchants Guild greeted him as a returning hero and provided full cooperation when Dennis announced human patrols would resume. The pirate organizations rapidly disappeared. They had flourished when nobody could stop them. They had no chance against organized human military operations. Backed by council authority, Merchant Cress approached Dennis with deep gratitude. Captain Wright, you cannot imagine how much we suffered without you, she said. We will never take human protection for granted again. The rebuilding process began across Council space. Human medical teams deployed to plague zones and implement proper quarantine. and treatment protocols, human. Relief workers provided aid to refugees and began the long process of resettlement, human. Peacekeepers separated warring factions and created conditions for negotiated peace, human. Engineers repaired damaged infrastructure and restored critical systems. Human administrators helped reorganize governmental functions that had collapsed, but this time, every human contribution was properly valued and compensated. Species that wanted human help had to negotiate fair terms. Projects that required human expertise had to offer equal partnerships. Security operations that needed human forces had to accept human command authority. The Council reformed its internal structure to prevent future exploitation. Constitutional amendments established clear rights for all member species. Economic systems were reorganized to ensure fair compensation. Decision-making processes were changed to require genuine consensus rather than domination by powerful species. Councilor Vexton attended the first session of the reformed Galactic Council and felt cautious hope. Admiral Kyle Harrison and Ambassador Lisa Monroe sat as full voting members with equal authority when Kyle spoke. Other council members listened with genuine respect when Lisa proposed policies. They received serious consideration. The contrast with previous centuries was striking. President Cole told me something during negotiations that I will never forget. Vexton said to the assembled council. He said that humanity always helped others because it was right, not because they expected gratitude. That selfless nature made humanity irreplaceable, but we mistook selflessness for weakness and generosity for servitude. We nearly destroyed galactic civilization because of that mistake. The council chamber fell silent as members reflected on the lessons learned. A Valarian elder named Cress spoke with emotion in her voice. The galaxy has paid a terrible price for the council's arrogance. Cress said, billions died who should not have died. Civilizations collapsed that should have thrived. We must ensure this never happens again. The council unanimously passed a resolution declaring the past 18 months a period of remembrance. Every council species would teach their children about the collapse and humanity's role in both maintaining galactic civilization and restoring it. 6 months after humanity's return, Nathan Cole visited Unity Prime for the formal ceremony marking the reformed council. He walked through stations and facilities that showed clear signs of recovery. Trade networks were rebuilding. Conflicts were being resolved through negotiation. Infrastructure was being repaired. Medical systems were functioning properly. The galaxy was healing. Nathan met privately with Vexton, and the two leaders reflected on everything that had happened. President Cole, I owe you a personal apology, Vexton said. I dismissed your concerns and treated you with contempt. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Nathan appreciated the apology but had more important concerns. Councilor Vexton, apologies matter less than actions. Nathan said, the question is whether the council has truly learned from this crisis, whether you will remember these lessons when times are good again. Vexton considered the question carefully. I cannot speak for future generations, but I can promise that my generation will never forget what happened.